already, and also the shelling has been mentioned already. The process, of course, urgently needs some reconciliatory gestures. Both Koreas rest, from my point of view, on a long common history and tradition, and they represent a grand national unity. And this has already been said as well. The large majority of the population still may accept the one-nation policy, but we have to be aware that in the course of time, societies are moving apart. Exchange programs between people, like visiting tours to Kumgansan, are important to keep memories alive. In the light of potential reservations and resentments of neighboring countries, it is essential that the Korean people remain strongly committed to unification, and Korea emerges as a reliable partner in regional and international cooperation. Both economies used to be complementary in 1945. This applies even more today, but it's the other way around. The industry is in the south and not anymore in the north. But economic cooperation is in the very interest of the South Korean business community, even if they don't want to believe it. But it's in the very interest of the South Korean community because of North Korea's natural resources. For North Korea, the revenues generated by Kaesong and Kumgangsan are, from my point of view, almost dispensable, taking into account that trade between North Korea and China jumped more than 30% in 2010 to almost $3.5 billion. And when we look to the quality of the trade, which has also significantly changed, it's not about coal. Of course, North Korea still ships 4.6 million tons of coal to China, but the quality has changed because North Korea exports more and more natural resources like rare earths and molybdenum ore to China. Only last year, and this is a very important point because molybdenum is a commodity for high technology products, for TFT screens and so on. So for a high-tech country like South Korea, this might be very interesting to come to a deal with North Korea on natural resources. Rare earths and molybdenum, China has always a world monopoly on this, and I know that you have to import it from China. Why not talking directly to North Korea? So the amount of molybdenum which was shipped to China last year is, and that's why I'm saying Kaesong and Kumgangsan, the amounts, it's almost peanuts, because the amount of molybdenum valued on the world market more or less $1.2 billion. So in principle, when you talk about the natural resources in North Korea is a rich country, is a very wealthy, could be a very wealthy country. In fact, one could think that North Korea possesses, the fact that North Korea possesses nuclear capabilities seems at first sight to form a severe obstacle for independently decide on the unification. But from my point of view, as we have witnessed in Europe, unification is a long-term perspective. And several sub-goals with the involvement maybe of the international community or the regional community as mediator should be implemented prior to substantial talks about the ultimate goal of unification and denuclearization. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Klich. But the problem is that, this is just my opinion, is that North Korea has been breaking away from the universal values of mankind, such as human rights, democracy, and market economy systems. And what is your perspective to handle this, or we can ignore those kind of things? And
no, I'm certainly not ignoring it, but it's a question when you talk about North Korea, what political discussion do we put in the foreground? What is priority? Is nuclearization the priority, or is it the exchange of people is the priority? Is unification the priority, or is dialogue the priority? So I would, of course, the situation of people in North Korea is very bad. It starts with the food situation. I have to admit this, there's no doubt about this. But how to overcome it? I think that by economic cooperation, you could overcome this situation.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Su Chang-hee, Shanghai International Study University. Would you care to speak?
Thank you very much. Thanks for Jeju's Forum's invitation. I'm happy to be here to present my point about the unification and the opportunities. My points are the following. One point is the coral peace or fragile peace in current East Asia international relations. The second point is about China's contribution to East Asia's peace. The third is about is related to this forum's topic. It's about Asians' standards, or Asians' models, or Asians' way of thinking about North Korea and and South Korea's unification issues. The first point, I think, peace, development, and cooperation are the trends of current international relations. Unfortunately, confrontations still exist in North and Northeastern Asia, especially in the Korean Peninsula. For most Chinese people, the major reason for it is not merely due to North Korea and South Korea. So this is a situation, and for most Chinese people thinking, is mostly due to the Cold War system in this area. So Chinese people may think the military presence of the U.S. in this area and the three security pacts are the most obstacles to the unification of the Korea Peninsula, as well as to the unification of Chinese Taiwan and mainland China. So 2 decades later, after the end of the Cold War in Europe, but the Cold War system still existing in East Asia. So in this sense, the peace in East Asia is quite fragile or cold. So this is the first point. The second point I want to talk is about China's contribution to East Asia's peace over the last 3 decades. So over the last 1 decade, China and the Southeast Asian countries' economic cooperation and Shanghai Cooperation Organization countries' economic cooperation are moving ahead greatly. So it means common development, common security, common interests are shared more and more broadly by China and the Southeast Asian countries and China and Central Asia countries. So I think common development, common interests, and common security are the triangle foundation of Southeastern Asia countries and Central Asia countries' cooperation. Comparatively, external and internal forces make cooperation quite difficult between both sides in Peninsula. So I think if both sides and 6 parties are jointly realize the trend of peace and development trend in regional international relations, I think we will not miss the opportunities, historical opportunities we are facing. This morning, there is a news in CCTV. This news talked about a joint venture of bicycles companies between China and North Korea. So there is a review of the news said that the joint ventures will smoothly or quietly change North Korea's traditional planning economy. So it's interesting news. The third point is about the Asian standard or Asian models. So I think political dialogue, economic cooperation, and cultural exchange are the effective ways to the unification of both sides. The confrontation or conflicts will ultimately not serve the interests of both sides and other countries in East Asia. So it is not consistent with the spirit of peace and development of current international relations. So in this sense, I think six-party talks mechanism is the effective way to reduce the tension of confrontation between both sides and to address the Korean Peninsula issues. Recently, Chinese President Hu Jintao talked about a concept of Asian spirit in recent Boao Forum for Asia last month. So Asia spirit, Hu Jintao refers to inclusive cooperation, mutual learning, common security and development, and achieving consensus among Asian countries. So I think maybe it is quite related to the topic of Asian standard of Jeju Forum. So Asian spirit or Asian consensus may be open a new way for us to rethinking the opportunities for Northeast Asian countries and to establish the harmonious Asia in the future. Finally, I think the unification depends mostly on the wisdom of North and South Koreans, on the wisdom of the people between the two sides. There is a proverb in China, and it means if you want to achieve something, so too quick or too fast to achieve the goals. So some people think the Chinese people look at the things from the norm perspective. The United States people look at issues from broader way or from broader perspective. I think Korean peoples look at issues deeply. So basically, I'm optimistic about the future of Korean Peninsula situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. And as you said, recently China is striving to build harmony. I mean, harmonious China for its people. And can China influence North Korea, this kind of new visions? What is your perspectives, Professor?
I think everything changes gradually or slowly. So just I mentioned about the news on CCTV. In the future, if North Korea's reforms could be moved toward social market economy or market economy, but I think basically it's a planning economy will be gradually transformed or changed. But that's a step, that depends on step by step. So radical way may be disaster or dangerous to any systems transformation.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Next, we'll be here from Evgeny Afanasyev, Minister of Foreign Affairs on the Russian Federation. Would you care to speak?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. But I'm speaking here not as an official representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but as a former ambassador to the Republic of Korea. I was ambassador here 10 years ago. And at that time, frankly speaking, the situation on the Korean Peninsula and the prospects for development of cooperation and ultimate reunification looked much better than now. So I would suggest, if we look back onto those periods, so our panel would be more correctly called Korea reunification, not new opportunities, but lost opportunities. But this is probably too pessimistic view. I agree with previous speakers that as an ultimate goal, this remains as a proclaimed goal both for North Korea and South Korea. And certainly nobody but Koreans must decide whether they need it, in what form, and when. And I personally think that nobody in the world can stop the process if two Korean states would decide to go this way. And nobody would be willing to do it. But the situation now, as I told you, is less optimistic than before. And the reasons are obvious. 6 dozens of years of hostility, war on the Korean Peninsula, a lot of ideological, economic, social, and other differences between two Korean states certainly left a big scar on the Korean nation. As a North Korean leader in one of the talks with us noted that during 2000 summit, North-South summit, he understood only 70% of what President Kim Dae-jung told him in Korea. 70%, 30%, he didn't understand. Even that shows how big is the difference between two Korean states. At the same time, I would like to say that the examples of other countries, including, of course, Germany reunification, have shown to us that sometimes things might turn unexpectedly to a better, more positive way. And we all should be at least theoretically prepared for these developments, and I would say welcoming such developments on the Korean Peninsula. The historical experience of our country, other states have shown that several key conditions must be present when we speak about this process. First of all, of course, favorable international situation. From that point of view, what we have now and what we had 60 years ago looks much better for Korean Peninsula. Because at that time we had Cold War, 2 military blocs, confrontation all around. Now many issues in the world can be settled from the point of view of international community differently. Then, of course, we need a political elite in both Koreas, strong will for mutual reconciliation, for peaceful coexistence, for developing of comprehensive contacts, economic cooperation, exchanges, and of course, a very important condition, the support of the majority of the people in both states for such a process to happen. I visited North Korea several times, and I can say you that among average people, the idea of reunification exists very strongly there, as well as in South Korea. Thirdly, of course, as Germany example have shown us, we need allocation, you need allocation, and maybe others, of necessary material, financial, and other resources for the reunification. The cost might be great, as the German example have shown, but the final outcome might be good for the Korean people and Korean Peninsula. And of course, psychological compatibility of the society is also very important. Patience, tolerance to each other, and of course, conflict-free coexistence if Korea someday will be reunified, also very important. All this, of course, requires a lot of work, a lot of patience, and a lot of wisdom. First of all, by two Korean states and their leaders. And as for the neighbors of Korea, I wouldn't speak for others, of course, but for Russia, we think that if one day United Korea will be formed, for Russia it will be a positive factor for several reasons. First of all, we are not interested for long-term hotbed of tension near our borders. For 60 years, we have this conflict on the Korean Peninsula, and recently we have even some military clashes. We want to see this stopped. Second, I think that the economic cooperation with United Korea would be much better for Russia. We have important projects. We announced them publicly 10 years ago and now, be it railroad connection, oil and gas transportation links, other projects that can be done only under peaceful situation on the Korean Peninsula. And of course, thirdly, some of my colleagues mentioned it, for new, potentially united Korea, it will be another question whether they need military forces here, foreign military forces, whether they need alliances in old forms, or they would pursue another policy in this area. So from all of this point of view, and because we are close neighbor of Korea, we would welcome such a development, even if in a distant future. Certainly, when I was here 10 years ago, I thought that some of the processes that started then might be reversible. But the developments during the last 10 years have shown us that they are reversible. Hopefully, it will be reversible again, in a good sense. For this, I totally agree. Dialogue, negotiations, direct contacts between two Koreas, bilateral or multilateral negotiations between other states and North and South Korea might help tremendously. So in this regard, I would be more optimistic for the future. And Russia, of course, has no intention to be a kind of mediator. This is the subject for two Korean states to decide, I mean, reunification and exchanges. But we want to be just a bystander. We are neighbor. If we ask to, we can help, because we have good contacts, good cooperation with both Korean states. And I think this is a possibility we will use if we were asked to do it. So I would remain now less optimistic, but still for the future, for the long-distant future, I think this issue will be high on the agenda in this area. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Afanasyev, for your insightful comments. And next, we will hear from Professor Okonogi. Will you care to speak?
이 세션은 한국 통일에 대한 세션인 줄 압니다만 요새 나는 그 한국의 분단에 대해서 많이 연구하고 있습니다. 가끔 분단 연구란 시점에서 독일을 생각할 때가 있습니다. 사실은 분단 연구하는 거하고 독일 연구하는 거 거의 비슷합니다. 그래서 분단